Welcome back, folks. Well, today on the show, I have a very special guest for you. As founder of the Institute of Nonviolence, this incredible lady delivers programs right across Australia. She's known for her men's behavior change programs and specializes in trauma, shame, intersectionality, and cultural safety. And I think you'll agree that all of those topics and that work is really important in our society today. Her aim and her work is driven by a goal to eradicate systemic racism and misogyny. And she brings a hard-hitting and spirited discussion to the table as we delve into the topic of imposter syndrome from the context of this work. So I'm going to invite you today to listen for how this context shapes the discussion about the imposter and consider how your context and your experience does too. So without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce my next guest, and her name is Hala Abdelnour. Good morning.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing all right.
Doing all right?
Better than last time.
Have you had a good week?
Have I had a good week?
Yeah.
Um, it's been okay. Yeah. I've it's been a interesting week. But yeah, I'm good. I'm doing okay. And you?
Um, Also an interesting week. I've been in a bit of a funk this week and I've come out of it, but yeah, it's been an interesting, just trying to get organized. I am very conscious that I have a lot of unfinished things on my plate, and
Mm,
now I need to finish this.
finish like this specifically or
Like
all
finish
things?
all those unfinished tasks, and I've just
Yeah.
been carrying it in my head. So I thought I better start actually writing this stuff down.
Yeah. I have a whiteboard right here. That I just, yeah, and notes everywhere. Like, yeah, I have to get it out. But then it's funny because I write them in different places. I'm like, where did I write it? I'm like, just go looking. Anyway, could be more systematic, but in the moment, it feels good to get it out of your head.
It does. It really does. And I've been doing some strategic planning around the business as well. So that's been good. It's taken me out of overwhelm and in a bit of structure, and yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
I definitely have to go through that process, but I don't have the time right now. Like I can't. So it will usually do it around Christmas, like December, January, when it's just a bit more quiet, take the time
yeah.
to plan for the year. But I think, yeah, we might do it a bit earlier this year, but yeah, we'll see how we go.
Do you have
It's
do you have staff, or is it just you?
oh no, there's 14 of us, but I'm the only full time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've got a part-time business support manager,
Yeah.
um, who does a lot of our like admin support, scheduling, client contact. I'm training her up now to write like business proposals. She's very talented. I'm also her background's she's got a master's in public policy,
Yeah.
and so public health policy, I think, or yeah. So she came to us through an internship, and so we're doing a piece of advocacy now, like with governments, and I'm getting her to work on that with me as well, because that's related, like that's what she studied. So yeah, we try to give people as much opportunity to expand
Yeah.
as they want. So even like most of us who do clinical work are trained therapists, all bar one, actually. So people can choose if they want to do clinical supervision and therapy and training delivery. Yeah, and just whatever they're interested in. I'm happy to support their growth. And it helps me, obviously, because I can't do everything on my own.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we have me and her are employees, and everybody else is a contractor, and that yeah, that allows the business to run very flexibly. It allows for all that flexibility, I think. People have kids, people have their own businesses that they run and employment elsewhere.
Yeah.
So they kind of can choose how much they want to work with us, and they choose what they do with us. So it's, yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. It's just I've always had this vision that the world doesn't need to be this 9 to 5 madness. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of nice to just, yeah, I didn't, I guess I've had ideas about launching business and stuff, you know, throughout my life. Once I launched it, I kept finding scraps of paper from when I was younger where I drew it up without knowing without like naming it, or, you know, I just drew up different things. But, you know, and I've always talked about, like, as an employee, I just thought it was stupid that somebody wanted me to sit on a chair from 9 to 5. Like, I'm not at my best in the morning, you know, and I'd be so much better if I could get up quietly, do other things, then come to work. I also know I can smash a lot out in a few hours. Like, I don't need to work 8 hours a day to get my work done. And I'd rather not. Whereas other people like enjoy spacing it out and being in the workplace and socializing. And it's like, why can't we create a world where people can just work how they want to? And anyway, so got a little bubble here.
Oh yeah, it's good. I hear I'm launching a part of my business that will develop leadership and life skills in young people at the beginning of their adulting and career life, because my position is that we shouldn't save leadership development for when you're 30 and 40. We should be starting at 20 so that you've got time to build the skills, you know.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just it's a bit like what you said. I'm encountering employers who are like, these young people today are just like, "Ugh," and there's all these complaints because there's all these value shifts, I guess. You know, there's a
Yeah.
whole different generation that have grown up very alien compared to previous, you know, with the tech and, you know,
Yeah.
just how things move and the availability of the possibility that you can make money from home doing something you love, which was not really talked about, you know, in previous generations or role modeled or anything like that, you know?
Yeah, that's right. Look, I think in the last 100 years around work, as we moved away from agriculture, you know, and into offices and factories and like all those things, it was done in a very rigid way. And it was, you know, it's Western society driven, and maybe we could say the same about the whole world, maybe not, and colonization's had an impact, but it was a very, very rigid mindset that that underpinned, you know, the governance of society over that period of time. It was very, you know, rigid gendered constructs, and you know, it was humans were moving away from centralizing um, morality, ethics, human connection, family, to centralizing economy. You know, it's just kind of like this madness about economic growth and gain. And, you know, now we have this capitalistic madness that's unsustainable. Um, had it been sort of managed slowly, it could have been all right. But I think it just was unleashed, you know, without control. And so, you know, the world's been destroyed as a result. And, but yeah, part of that is, oh, we build big office, you know, this is how we do business and this is what it looks like. And you buy the employee, you know, like if you look at employee contracts and the context of employment is like, it's slavery, like you've been purchased by some person who heads some organization whose intention is to make more money for the directors. Like, no wonder the younger generation is like, nah. Like it's great, good. I kind of go, man, if you're struggling with the new way of thinking, then that's kind of makes sense because you're possibly still attached to a very rigid mind construct, and rigidity struggles in the face of change. It's very hard. You know, if you think of, like, the beauty of it is it's strong, it stands strong in what it is. So, you know, if you think of like a steel rod, it's not going to break, but it's not going to bend in a storm. Like,
Yeah.
massive winds of change will break it because it just can't bend, it can't flow. So, yeah.
And I think there are some paradigm shifts happening for sure. It's going to be interesting to see, how it all kind of plays out.
Yeah, yeah. Look, I think elements of it are really exciting. Elements of it are painful. The shifts. I feel like when Trump got voted out of office last time, his exit was very like visually representing the exit of the previous era of patriarchal capitalist control. And it's like not gonna let go without a fight, without like a very childish tantrum style. Um, yeah, fight. And everybody else is going, let's just put some nurture in here. That's what's been missing for so long. Like I think about that a lot in the space I'm in. We just launched into the conversation. Is that like your, yeah. Um,
We might
I,
back
sorry.
we might backtrack a little bit at some point.
Would you like to backtrack now?
No, you go for it.
Okay, so I like woke up thinking about this morning, and it's something I think about quite a bit because I'm in the space of supporting family violence response, across Australia and other parts of the world. And but particularly this is within an Australian context. It can apply to other contexts. But I was thinking how, like through the clinical supervision I do and the therapeutic work that we do and the training that we deliver and interactions we have with the sector so broadly across the country. And we just see so much unnecessary suffering, particularly amongst the practitioners that do the work. And it just, for me, often comes back to the complete lack of nurture in the structures that we've put in place through our service sector, through our government policies and funding modalities, where there's a whole space dedicated. It's underpaid, under-resourced, undermined, disregarded by most of society. It's not centralized in any way, but it's a sector that's working with people's most intimate, personal experiences that cause so much pain, that are so important. We're sort of like talking about children who might be in danger, people who just can't figure out how to be safe and respectful in relationships. People are experiencing the dynamics and are stuck in this, cycle of violence. And it touches everyone. We know that anybody anywhere in society can experience these things. The sector dedicated to supporting the work is the most under-resourced, undermined bunch of people and under-nurtured, and so, and everyone goes, oh, there's vicarious trauma. Like, because you listen to difficult stories, you're going to have vicarious trauma. And it's like, it's not actually, it's systemic trauma. It's trauma because the system doesn't pay enough, isn't nurturing. There's no nurture in it at all. And it's like, I was thinking in the most basic level, if you see a small child and they've fallen over and they've hurt themselves, you pick them up, you can, you console them, you mend the wounds, you hold them, in whatever way that looks until they've healed, like until they're sort of bouncing around again. And that's like the fundamental core pillar of crisis support. But it isn't. Our crisis support is call the police, get the judges involved. Like, it's not nurture. There's no healing in it at all. It's punitive.
Yeah.
And so that damages our soul when we're working in the sector. We're not, those of us who work in the service industry, we didn't study, we didn't necessarily, we might have studied these things. We didn't choose to work in a space that's punitive. We chose to work in a healing space, but the healing space we work in is just underpinned by cycles of violence. And so it's like, how does a system that's founded on violence end violence?
Mm.
Small
Yeah.
things I grapple with when I wake up in the morning. Little ponderings. Just then I have breakfast. And then I turn on my computer.
But you are right insofar as, if you look at those jobs that provide the most nurture and care that we need, look at people who are working in aged care homes or, who are a lot of the times behind the scenes, even teachers to some degree, like who are influencing and engaging with people in sometimes their most vulnerable states. And you look at what they get paid to do that. look at the wage or the salary of a cop and what they get paid to put their life on the line. And you question, where are our values in society? Like
Yeah.
our priorities are mixed up.
Yeah, yeah. And even then, it's easier for us to recognize that police put their lives at risk, fire, ambulance. They get paid a lot more than social work, like way more. They get extra leave, they get unlimited free counseling, they get benefits, government benefits like in their pension. And so yes, it's nowhere near as paid as a corporate person who exists just to make money, even if it's destructive. But even within that, social workers get paid less than teachers and nurses. Like, if we think of who do we know in society is always like striking and talking about being underpaid, and they are underpaid. I'm saying like nurses and teachers should strike and get paid more, but social workers kind of like, just the most unadvocated for sector, and get paid less than all of these people. There isn't extra leave. There's like 3 to 4 EAP sessions, if you're struggling with work. Like, what's 3 or 4 counseling sessions going to do for you? Like, how come? Yeah, like, I think we should get what the emergency services get if we're in those spaces. Like, if we're working in spaces where we're constantly interacting with police work, which family violence would be one, mental health, substance abuse, forensic care. There's so many spaces that social workers are in where they're working with emergency services. The emergency services personnel working there are recognized for how much crisis they're enduring, but the social workers doing the same thing, or the psychologists even sometimes aren't.
Yeah.
Like, no one goes, oh, you've just been exposed to this suicide or homicide. We should give you like 4 weeks off, fully paid and unlimited counseling for you till you feel better. I imagine that. Imagine caring.
So tell me a little bit about the Institute of Nonviolence. Tell me about the work that you do there and why this is important to you. So for the people that are listening, they're going to get a sense of who you are and what this is all about.
Sure. And thank you for inviting me along to talk about my business. It's sort of, I always joke, I previously, I've been consulting in equity and inclusion spaces, anti-racism and gender equity, for about 20 years. And so I have a business called Global Echo Consultants. And my joke is that in 2020, Global Echo and I had a baby, and we called it the Institute of Nonviolence. And it's a joke, but also in so many ways, I think those of us, like, it's an entrepreneurial world, like other people will feel the same in their own spaces, but it is such a personal relationship we have with these businesses, and it's always very warming, heartwarming, and quite beautiful when someone else takes an interest in this thing you've done. It's like, I don't know, I put it out there. So thank you for the invitation to talk about it, because I have this powerful relationship with my business, and no one else has to care. But the Institute of Nonviolence was born out of basically a rising need. As a consultant that I was seeing, I was getting a lot more requests and work coming my way that was family violence related and not DEI related. And COVID had started, like, we were in the middle of this pandemic, and there was rising rates, and the sector straight away was worried about that, and governments. And I was in Melbourne at the time, and was commissioned to do a report for the Victorian Multicultural Commission, looking at gaps in service delivery to men who use violence from marginalized communities, culturally marginalized communities. And then that just, there was like this domino sort of rippled into other organizations who were doing stuff, who got some funding, like sort of recognizing that what I was recognizing in myself at the time, that I've over 20 years formed this niche area of specialization, let's call it, where I can work with culturally diverse communities, basically any cultural background. I can work with forensic clients. I can work with addiction. I can work with violent and offending behaviors, newly arrived communities, young people, women, men. And so Institute of Nonviolence brings those skills together. And it was basically in response to being recognized for that and asked to do certain pieces of work, but also having worked in the sector as an employee for so long, um, or seeing the gaps and being, I got tired of being shoved to the side and even bullied by senior management, even CEOs for having an opinion, for having ideas, for voicing things out. I think it's the hierarchical nature of employment is if you're on the lower end of that hierarchy, you're not supposed to have a say, you're not supposed to know anything, you're supposed to just sit in a corner and just do your work. And I also definitely experienced a racial element of that. Like I don't want to take that away. I had colleagues on the same level as me who were taken seriously, who weren't experiencing the same, and also like overtly express racism. So I was a diversity hire in so many cases, and I got a lot out of that. I learned a lot from that, from just being given opportunities to work in spaces because I was a diversity hire. But I got tired as well. I got tired of just dealing with those things, and maybe I'm not cut out to deal with those things. Maybe, like I don't know, something about my personality. I thought I can't be employed anymore. I just want to,
So let's
carve
there for a sec, right? Because you talked about like the underlying conflict or tension in the workplace. And is that something you confronted head on, or is that something you just kind of notice and paid attention to? You could see what was happening, but you were more in the observer space. How did you handle that?
Yeah, look, in my 20s, I was very much an observer of it. I was constantly experiencing it. I was in my 20s after September 11th. So I was 21 when September 11 happened. So I was the president of the Arabic Club at Melbourne Uni at the time. And, just being a young Arab Australian, it was a very difficult time. But and I soon graduated and started working. And in one of the spaces I was working in, we were providing Arabic cultural competency training across Victoria mostly, and across, various sectors, government, education, health.
So this is
And
understanding of Arabic culture and how to
yeah,
do
cultural
business
competency training.
relationships within the culture.
Cultural competency training, which I refuse to do now, is geared to reinforce stereotypes. There's this idea that you can go into a room and teach people about your culture, and then they'll get better at knowing what to do when they encounter you. And all of that misses racism. All of that misses the fact that whiteness is centralized as the norm, that is alienating and othering in itself, and it's perpetuating more racism. Because how can I describe my culture to you? Like, so people, I'd have to answer questions like, do we take our shoes off at the door? Do we shake hands? Do we not? And I just thought, well, you can't summarize Arabic people. Like, when you see an Arab do this, like, that's ridiculous. But it kind of basically is what cultural competency training is. So I absolutely refuse to do it, like, since being in my mid-20s, or like late 20s. But it included providing that kind of training to the Australian Federal Police at the time and Victoria Police. And at the same time, I worked as a substance abuse, like as an AOD clinician in a maximum security male prison, and just kind of, being exposed to systemic racism there, and like for, who we incarcerate and how people are treated and the sentencing structures. And so, that was my 20s, was observing, not being promoted at work, being asked by a manager in one workplace why the Lebos are destroying Coburg and Broadmeadows, having to ask, being approached by another manager, sort of like after September 11, like in my face like this. I just walked in to do my shift, and my manager walks right up to me and goes, like, they swore, said, I effing hate Muslims. I just hate Muslims. And I was like, I just want to start my shift. Just, it was like just coming off the street and get that, so it was so many, like, it was just constant. Like, I have too many stories. And you get, like, I think a lot of us as young women, we're not trained to say no, to speak up, to have a voice, to, like, I had experienced racism as a kid. Like, I was physically beaten every day in school because I migrated here. I didn't speak English. I was so different. So it wasn't like, oh, I was so confident. I was angry, And I wouldn't always stay like I was angry, but I also had this, maybe because I was also in this space of delivering the training, or something about me, I don't know. I also had a compassion, like I had a patience to sit and answer. So when I was asked why the Lebos are destroying Coburg and Broadmeadows, that was a 2-hour conversation I had with that manager to just explore why they felt that way, what it was they were seeing, and whether they thought Anglo-Australians ever destroyed anything. So it's sort of like this slow, gentle kind of, what impact it had, I don't know. But that was my 20s. And then I think I ran out of steam. So
So
in my
like,
30s,
because you've already, like, if we unpack this, you're already kind of talking about, so, obviously the racism is there, but what's coming also to me is you're this young woman, you know, of, cultural heritage, right? And you're in these spaces that you must have been out of place, like you don't belong there. Like, if you're
oh,
in prison and you're working with the Australian Federal Police, or you're doing things in these environments, these are, like, for me, it's such a juxtaposition of a contrast between, that predominant narrative and culture and way of thinking versus you showing up in those spaces. Like, do what's going on in your mind in there? Like, are you feeling, what are you saying to yourself in these times?
I think those positions put you in a box, and the box is I'm an Arab Australian, or just an Arab, actually. Like in those moments, I'm an Arab and I have to answer to all Arabs and for all Muslims, because all Arabs are Muslim, like in everybody's stereotyping minds. And I don't actually like to talk about this because I don't I'd be proud to be Muslim. But the irony of it is I'm not, and the amount of times I've been hired, my name sounds very Muslim, I come from the Middle East, so I must be. And the amount of times I've been hired because I'm like a Muslim hire and I'm not in a hijab, even when I had longer hair, like I kind of, I feel like, I think people feel safe, like, oh, I'm a safe Muslim and they can hire me, and then they've ticked the diversity box. And then I rock up and I'm like this anti-racism, warrior, and they regret the day they hired me. Like I was supposed to sit in the corner and be quiet and just make them
No,
look
but
good, maybe pose for a flyer.
you have, I mean, Elizabeth, we had Elizabeth Lang on the show, and Elizabeth Lang has a very Anglo-Saxon kind of name, really, and she talks about walking into rooms and people are like, oh, we're waiting for Elizabeth. And she's like, yeah, I'm Elizabeth. And I mean, the ridiculous of people. And the fact, like you talked about this compassion, like this bias that's prevailing that they don't even know is there, right? And they don't even know to question this bias that's existing within themselves, so like the work that you guys do, both of you, is so important for bringing that out. Because you talked about healing before, and oftentimes if we don't know that this stuff is going on inside of us, we don't know what needs to be healed. We don't understand that, my model of the world and your model of the world are going to be completely different. And if I'm trying to make your model of the world, I'm trying to understand your culture, but from my model of the world, instead of coming over there and looking at it from your point of view in the same way that you look at it, there's going to constantly be this, this butting and this jarring.
Yeah.
I'll just give a quick example for people that are listening where this might be new and just something to consider. And I'm, talking about models of the world there. I have a friend of mine who worked for a Canadian gold company for a little while. And he's from Kenya originally. And he said, Jenny, the funniest thing, like this company went to Africa, and because they have a snowmobile, like a tent kind of thing for the workers in Canada, they went to Africa and built the same thing. And he's like, it just like, because they didn't think that, oh, it doesn't snow in Africa. Like, we don't need this, and I see this a lot. I see this I just see this show up all the time in relationships. And if you watch a lot of what's going on in the States, a lot of the racial kind of conversations, it's just people not actually taking a step back to consider how do they live, what's influenced and shaped how they've become who they are, and to understand that, you know, what shaped me, what shaped you are two different things. We're gonna see things in a completely different perspective. You know, we've been influenced by different things.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the work that I've been doing in the last 10 years or so, around cycles of violence and the nuances of power abuse, which we sort of have just channeled all our energy as a society towards men, you know, and I take very seriously the murder rates of women, and which are escalating. It also doesn't surprise me that we're not reducing the murders, because if you just go, oh, that's the problem, you deny your own abuse of power. There's a denial that there's a perpetrator in all of us and there's a victim in all of us, you know, and most of us don't fit in either just privileged or just oppressed. The majority of human beings fluctuate between oppression and privilege in various ways. And we love, like, no, we don't love. We can say I'm being victimized. Like, it's easier to say I've been victimized here, right? That's not always easy, because if the victimization is actually really damaging, it can be very confronting to acknowledge that I'm actually being suppressed somehow. But it's much harder for us to go, I've been violent here, I've been abusive. And the truth is, all of us have at some point been abusive in some way, abused some power we've got over. So if I have this amazing business idea and I can see an opportunity in Africa and I just do all the dollars, you know, I work out my spreadsheets and I get my investors and I'm going to make millions of dollars, I'm immediately automatically becoming violent, because I'm 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 investing in a process that is going to undermine people somewhere else. I'm going to invade their land, and that doesn't mean I have to colonize it or have an army with me. I'm going to go there with my power and privilege as a white person or someone who lives in the West, go somewhere else, use up resources so that I can make a lot of money. And nowhere in that did I consider having locals be my partner. Nowhere in that did I, if I was considering sharing the resources as opposed to having a competitive mindset, if I had a collaborative mindset and I think, okay, this is a good business idea, I can't make the money unless I go to someone else's home. So why don't I share my idea with that person and we can go out, because I've got the business ideas. I know I can make it happen and they'll benefit too, but I need their knowledge too. And I also need their permission to do this in their own lands. And if I went that way, I'd have a much better time. I'd avoid a lot of suffering by building the wrong tent or whatever it was, you know. And everything could be an open negotiation. But with that comes the sharing of resources. So if I want to hoard resources, I will suffer and cause suffering. And that is me entering into a cycle of abuse. And you know, for me, there's no other way. There's no way out of that. Like, you can talk yourself out of that. Um, at the moment in my life, I see that as an absolute truth, that I'm now engaging in power abuse. And there will be suffering for someone, or probably a lot of people.
Mm. Yeah.
That's how that's, I guess that's a big part of when I launched the Institute. I was thinking a lot about collaboration, collaborative models. So I didn't launch as a not-for-profit. I launched as a private business because I don't want it, because I don't like competitive tendering. I don't agree with competitive tendering as a model. I I know that our current governments can see that it's a problem, but they can't see a way out of it. There's sort of this ideology around competitive tendering, and so they're open to conversations about something else. It's gonna, and we, you know, we will get there, but there's sort of such an attachment to this is the best way to do things that it's going to take time to see something else. And the sector that is engaged in that has gotten used to it, even though they don't like it. So we're all in this sort of thing. But I didn't want to be involved in that, so I launched a private business. And I thought, well, you all compete with them for the money, and if you think my services are valuable, then you can hire me. You know, like, it's sort of we can here's the support we offer the sector. And I know I haven't, I'll unpack that in a second. But that's one way that I chose not to engage in competition in a competitive mindset. And the other collaborative thing is we do exist to support multi-sectors. So we work with not-for-profit, government, and the private sectors in the ways that they require our services around family violence support or equity and inclusion. And And the other thing of it is I don't want to create a hierarchy. So I had some amazing people working with me when I launched, and sort of help me to start the business. And sort of strategic mindsets and stuff, and people who draw up charts, and sort of the profiling of the business and all those things, which taught me so much. I don't have that background, but every single one of them drew the pyramid with the CEO on top, and every single person just like, that's the model, that's how businesses work. And I was like, no pyramids at the Institute. Like, I'm not building an empire, and I don't want to run a hierarchy. And it's like, I don't understand how the CEO is always on top, because if IT falls apart, I'm meaning, like, there's no worth to, I have much less worth than the IT expert that works with us. If like the bookkeeping, I mean, show me a spreadsheet and I fall apart. Like, my bookkeeper is the most amazing human being. So the finances are so held by that person. Of course, we work in collaboration, we look at it. It's, there are areas around training skills or content development or clinical practice that I'm not trained in every type of clinical practice. I don't know how to do everything. So the different people that work with me are, I see it as this moving cyclical model where we move in and out of being central to because you're central to the business when you're doing your thing and you're applying your specialization. So it's a polycentric model, and
Yeah.
it's a model that, like, everybody like it's kind of like the solar system, really. So we're all rotating around each other, like, and the central sun is the business. It's not a
Yeah.
person. It's
Yeah.
it's the objectives. It's what's the business arise from a need in the community. So as long as that need is there, we're sort of revolving around it, enabling. We're trying to enable change. We're enabling support. We're enabling clinical advancement or whatever thought, leadership or whatever it is. But we're not it. We're not the center.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's they're the thoughts I've had around what a collaborative model. And also, I think when I've been asked what is feminist leadership, like, feminism can't be anything to do with the patriarchy. So I feel like feminist leadership it's not about having a woman on top of a patriarchal hierarchical structure. That's the patriarchy. Just with gender isn't feminism. You know what I mean? Feminism is an ideology. So if you're a woman behaving like patriarchally, you're not a feminist. Like, we can't change the meaning of feminism just to make ourselves feel better. So feminism for me is, you know, injecting what's been missing from a purely patriarchal model, which is the nurturing side, which is the flexible, which is the, uh, like, creating space, not like work, that kind of. So the masculine energy, as I understand it, is a creator, is a protector, a provider. It's the alpha. It's, it's a doer. It's action driven. It builds things. It creates things. So we need that. But if it runs ramp, if it goes off without, like, any kind of reining in, and I think the feminine energy is what reins it in. And this isn't about people's gender. These are energies that exist and we can all embody them. And the feminine energy slows things down, asks for help, expresses vulnerability, creates space for nurture. So for me, if you're going to be a feminist leader, it's equalizing, it's working with the masculine to create space for those things. And we have to keep checking, are we doing this? Are we doing this? What else do I need to think about? And that's like tasking. It's not, it's so much easier to just run a business however you want to run it and just be like, oh, is it making money? All right, it's good enough. Have we got, and just look at charts. Are we, is it going up? But, for me, it's, I'm in a space where it's about social impact. I can't, like, for me, social impact is so fundamental.
Yeah. So let's part of my exploration in this topic, and we haven't even got there yet, but around the imposter syndrome was looking at things like, so the environment or people or situations that might activate those feelings, like that you're a fraud or that you don't belong there, or that you're not good enough in some way to do what you're doing. I mean, you're obviously doing some extraordinary work, that's really at the grassroots level of community that are making significant impact and changes in people's lives and in the way that they think and the way that they can move forward with what they're doing. So talk to me a little bit about, you know, your own journey with that experience of, you know, do you experience imposter syndrome? Have you experienced that? You know, what is that like for you? And, you know,
Like
I
my
want to
whole life. Sorry.
no, I was just going to say, I do qualify this with knowing that I am asking a lot from you in terms of the vulnerability. But, you know, for people who are listening here, who identify or really resonate with what you're saying and, you know, the context that you've created for us, I think it's
Mm.
important in terms of role modeling and in terms of normalizing this conversation, because it's easy to look at somebody and go, oh, they're successful or this or they're that. I could never be that, and not really know what's going on, you know, beneath the surface. So we want to kind of normalize that.
100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Look, I've cried. I was saying, like, I got here with tears and blood and sweat and nightmares and therapy, and lots of meditation. And like what, I think I was in my 30s when I first heard about imposter syndrome, and I was like, oh, it's got a name, like, and I was like, that's just how women behave. Like, I was kind of just something that I noticed as I got older, that women tended to behave certain ways in workplaces. So one, that kind of label gave it a description. It was like, oh, okay, people are noticing that this is real, and and then I read an article which said I refuse to call it that, because imposter syndrome places it on the individual, like this person has imposter syndrome, and it's like a pathology that this person has, and they're not able to navigate the world. But the truth is, we do see it more in women and in marginalized people, because it's actually a systemic oppression. That's what it is. It's how you respond when you've been systemically oppressed, when you've been undermined and, sort of shoved in a corner and disregarded and not sort of like always outside the norm, outside what's best, outside what's, sort of venerated in society, like whiteness and maleness and heterosexuality and all those things that you will obviously, I'm going to question myself if I'm being told overtly or subtly by the world around me since I was born that I'm not supposed to be in leadership. I'm not supposed to have an opinion. I'm not supposed to voice my opinion. Actually, like, I'd go as far as I'm not supposed to have one, let alone speak it out. And I'm not supposed to occupy certain spaces, and I have to make myself invisible. And there's things that just are, and I have to put up with them, even though they're actually damaging to me, like sexual assault and harassment, and racial violence. Like, it's just how it is. So those of us who experience those things build so much resilience around it. Like, I actually think we are the next generation of leaders, because we have built so much character, so much substance, like, to overcome these things. We've become powerful in ways that I don't think are possible if you don't experience that kind of adversity. So there's lots of adversity you can experience, but if life is a bit too easy, your leadership might lack substance. And I say that, with our politicians in mind, who we know are from, very privileged backgrounds, because we don't have equitable systems. They fit a very specific demographic. That's just one. Corporate leaders would be another one. Where's the excitement in their leadership? It's like formulated and the same. It's on repetition, and like, we've memorized their script and it's boring. So it's like, okay, it's good, it gets them power and money, but what else? Like, look at the world that they've created through their leadership. And so it's uninspiring. And I think what we're inspired by now is a young person speaking up about growing up non-binary, what they went through, or a Black person talking about what they've experienced, and an Indigenous person anywhere in the world, like, talking about the loss of their land and the disconnection and the resilience their families have built through that. I watched a movie last night about it was a documentary called Where the Olive Trees Weep, and it's it's a documentary filmed in Palestine in 2022, and the power and resilience of the people in that film. I don't even know if they're alive now, but it was just so inspiring to see what humans can overcome and what you become when you overcome. And that's what's always inspired. If we think of what figures are really famous for being inspirational, they overcame adversities, right? The figures that are famous for being assholes, they had privilege and power.
Yeah.
I don't know where we started, but this is something that is important. Oh yeah, imposter syndrome. Sorry. So I think imposter syndrome is actually a really nice way to silence that resilience and that growth. Like, let's keep that going. And so many people question themselves, and then if they start to come out of it, like they'll see all the glass ceilings and bamboo ceilings and however many ceilings we've created, there is I think, a conscious, like we keep talking about unconscious bias, subconscious bias, whatever, like people, I actually think there's a conscious bias. There's at a certain level in society, and it's pretty high up, there's a conscious effort to maintain white control over the world and male control over the world. I don't think it's subconscious at all. And it's evident there are elements of subconscious behavior 100%, but I just want to I want to name conscious bias, conscious oppression, because when I sit, okay, I'm talking about much higher levels, like the monetary system we've created, military systems, and the whole world is run by conscious bias, basically, white supremacy and patriarchy, and
There's definitely
but
there for sure.
sorry,
I said there's definitely a power base there, and
yeah,
and it's interesting hearing you talk about that. I mean, I was born in Australia, and I went to primary school in Sydney, and I was part of, a group of kids who were all, migrant kids. Even though I was born there, I was never Australian, right? Because I didn't look the typical. But I never really felt like I could talk about those things, like I experienced bullying at school. I experienced people making comments about the food that I had, and I'm in primary school. So it's like, I'm just eating whatever my parents gave me. But I feel like, from my personal experience, it's not something I've spoken about a lot, because I feel like there's a real intolerance for people to even hear it. And it's almost like, well, what are you complaining about? I'm not complaining. I don't have a chip on my shoulder. It's just that this was what's so, these are the things I actually saw or I went through, and, people saying things to me. And very much, a lot of what you've expressed are things that I've been through personally, and so those, in terms of those environments and being someplace where you don't feel like you fit in, I think a lot of people in my situation who are first generation Australian, particularly, of my vintage, would say they spent a lot of time doing whatever they had to fit in, sound
yes,
like,
yeah. And if we look at trauma work, like that's actually survival. That's a coping mechanism. Like that's we learn that that's what we have to do to survive. Like I learned how to survive. The first thing I had to do was speak English and get rid of my accent as fast as possible. That was a survival thing. When we read about third culture kids, which is kids that first generation or migrated as children like I did, and grow up balancing two cultures. So there's one term for that is third culture kids. And some of the traits of third culture kids is they're very adaptive, very flexible, tend to be able to get along with lots of different people, tend to like scan an environment really quickly and figure out how it works and then adapt themselves to it. And it's because we had to do that. Like it was a matter of safety, and a lot of us physical safety, not just emotional and psychological. So it's quite real. And that's why I say our skills are quite real as adults, because we are better at negotiation. We are more flexible in our thinking. We are more fluid. These are traits of good management and good leadership. And we aren't being recognized for that by people who want to hold on to power and hold on to their sense of superiority just because they're of a particular heritage, cultural heritage, or whatever. I'm not going to call it race because that's a farce as well. There's not different races. There's one human race. Some of us have developed better skills than others because we've had adversity. And It's taken me a long time. I didn't always sound like this. Like I do get a lot of young women coming out to me like, "Oh my God, you just say it as it is. Like I love it. I'm so inspired by you. I wish I was that confident." I'm like, "You should have met me in my 20s." Like I didn't always sound like this. This is
So
me having had enough.
what did it take? Like,
It
I
took
know
a lot of
what it's
racism.
for me to get here. And it was certainly
Yeah.
not an overnight thing. So what did it take for you to get past, that voice in your head, plus, the very real things that were happening in the environment, and
Mm.
your encounters with people or in situations? What did it take?
Yeah, it took a lot of things. I spent most of my 20s thinking I wasn't articulate, and if only I could articulate like English people do, and if only I was as balanced as Anglo-Australians are. Like I'm too emotional and I'm too erratic and I can't articulate, and I don't think my English is that good. Like that was me in my 20s. I've got like 3 university degrees. I could write, like I was paid to write people's PhDs, and like so, and whatever, like edit their work and stuff. And I thought my English was crap and I couldn't articulate. And that's because I was like, that's how I was treated in every meeting, in every environment, even in leadership programs that I participated in. And even though I did the work around equity and inclusion, I'd never applied it to myself. So I have this, my brain does this interesting thing where I deny my own experience. And again, it's a coping mechanism. And so I learned about trauma and PTSD in uni, and I didn't think it applied to me, even though I grew up in a war zone. Like, so it wasn't until later in life I was asked to sit in on someone else's training workshop just to give my to review it as a peer. And they were talking about trauma, like refugee experiences and trauma. And I was like just sitting there going, "Oh my God, that's me," And it was like, how did it take me so long? I was in my 30s. Um, that was one thing where there was a turning point for me to validate and acknowledge my own experiences. And I think it's okay if we take our time, because it is very confronting, as I said earlier, to recognize where you've been victimized quite in very damaging ways. It's not part of our coping is to actually move on and just keep going. And so where you just sit and go, "Oh my
Something.
God."
I have a similar but different experience. For me, it was, I think, the part about sticking out for me was not being the same as everybody else. So I didn't have blue eyes, I didn't have blonde hair, and that was just the biggest thing for me, and I was 28, sitting in a gym class waiting for the class to actually start. I think maybe a little bit younger, but well into my sort of late 20s. Um, and I looked into the mirror and I was like, "Oh wow, I'm brown." I was like, when did that happen? I mean, I can laugh at it now, but and this, again, in the exploration of this study of imposter syndrome, what I'm uncovering is how your vision gets distorted. So you don't actually see things, as they are. You
Yeah,
see them as you are, right?
yeah,
And your hearing gets distorted. So when people are giving you compliments or whatever, it's not just that you're deflecting that, it's that you don't even allow it to come in, and
yeah,
I had this, thing that, oh, I've got to remain humble. So we don't do that because I'm going to end up with a big head and all of this stuff. And you don't realize then you've just cocooned yourself completely, and who you think you are and who you actually are and how people experience you are completely different.
yeah. Look, and also I think that's a great example for those of us who can't just go, "I'm black or white." Um, I think it's a great example, and it's so relative because one, I had slight lighter hair when I was younger, but not blonde by any sort of um consideration of the West, But in Lebanon, like I grew up being the blonde one in the family. Like I'm white compared to my cousins. Like I was like, they used to give me shit because I'd burn before I started tanning in summer. They just go black straight away, and I would just like take some time. Like I can go very dark, but I burn, because I'm considered white in Lebanon, and I'm considered blonde-ish, not blonde blonde, but blonde. Like I was that, and and then I come here, and then as Anglo-Australians are telling me I'm dark all the time. Like, I'm not dark, I'm blonde. And like, I was referring to myself as blonde. And they're like, and I would say, "Oh, do you know such and such? They got like blonde hair." And they're like, "She's got brown hair." And I'm like, "No, that's kind of blonde." Because my measure of blonde is based on the Middle East. you know, so, and I've heard this from other people too that come from countries where it's mixed and you can have like different skin tones. Our understanding of what's blonde and what's dark is based on where the context that we grew up in. So yeah, I think of myself as pretty fair, but no Anglo person that knows me thinks I'm fair. You know, so they think I'm really dark. And
Yeah, I've had that
I don't
too.
know. Yeah, like, you know, you look in the mirror and you're like, I'm brown. I look in the mirror and I go, I'm brown and I'm white. And, you know, it depends if it's summer or winter. And I call myself olive because that, like, I love that term, you know, of all the, like, I love the term Mediterraneans have, olive skin. And yeah, I'm like, I'm olive because I love olives too. Olive trees are like so sentimental to us. You know, we come from olive country and olive oil, the whole bit. Like, just call me olive. Like, I'm okay with that. But I want to say something else too to answer that because I think it's important, and you might, I don't know if you'll relate to this. Um, and I said I used to do the work, but I didn't apply it to myself. And the other way I did that was, yeah, the whole thing about not being articulate. And I was in my mid-30s and I was talking to a friend who really gets this stuff. And I said, oh, I'm not articulating myself properly at work. Like I wish I could get better. And she just looked at me and said, Hala, that's how microaggressions work. And just kind of went, duh, 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 duh. And I was like, I can't believe I trained on this. But, and that's the thing is when we understand something intellectually is not the same as when we embody the learning and and it was in that moment, like literally sitting in a bar having a glass of wine, and my friend just goes, that's how microaggressions work. They do these things and they leave you feeling this way. And I was like, oh yeah, of course. Like, and then I was like, I am articulate in that moment. Like, I think probably with a bit of support, like, yeah, that was the conversation. Like, you are articulate. This is what you said, you know, and that was it. That was the last time I ever said I wasn't articulate. Like, from that day, I was like, I am articulate. I do have good thoughts. I don't know everything, but I have studied a lot. I have got a CV, you know, I've got the microaggression person's CV, right? Because the imposter syndrome CV. So I keep accumulating stuff. So I know my CV is impressive. I know what I've done. I know what I've learned. I know I'm not the best person on the planet. I don't know all things, but I'm not articulate, and I'm not stupid, and I'm not annoying, and I'm not a nuisance because, you know, I have something to say in this meeting. And that was it. And even though my mentality shifted, my colleagues' behaviors around me didn't. But I stopped personalizing it. Like, it changed my world to walk into the office and say, the problem is you're racist. That's the problem right now, is you're racist. You see it or you don't see it, but you're not doing anything about it. And I'm not going to wear what you tell. And I just want to be clear. This is around being questioned around my religion. You know, like, I don't understand my religion because how could I be Christian from the Middle East? You know, and so, like, arguing with a colleague and my boss for 2 months about whether I was Christian or Muslim in open, like, they felt quite comfortable to yell that out, like, in an open office environment. This is in, you know, a government institution. And, you know, it's sort of like, I'm pretty sure I know. Do you know where Jesus was born? Like, and I actually said to them one day, because I had enough, and I said, I'm so Christian, Jesus is my cousin. Like, just like, you know, that's how Christian I am. He's born next door. Like, it was just, there's nothing Muslim about me. And it's like, I don't want to say those things out loud. Do you know what I mean? Because I grew up, I'm very mindful that where I grew up, there's a lot of religious tensions, and I don't like that. It breaks my heart. And I'd be happy to be Muslim. I'd be happy to be Druze. I'd be happy to be Christian. I'd be happy to be anything, even Jewish, right? I don't want to have religious segregation, but it's this battle that I get, this space I get put into where I have to sort of defend something that I don't want to defend because somebody can't just accept my identity. They want to, like, give me a new identity. So I'm not talking about playing the race card. I'm talking about very serious things. I'm talking about being asked why the Lebos are destroying things, you know, being asked about why, you know, being told that, oh, you know, Aboriginal people who get their jobs, you know, it's because of positive discrimination and quotas. It's not because you know, they have the qualifications. And it's like, well, did you know that person has a PhD in this? And did you know that person set up that unit at this hospital? And, you know, did you know, like, they wrote a book about this? And it's like, what is wrong with you in this day and age saying this? in an office environment. So yeah, I actually think if you're out there and you think you're not articulate, like, and you're not sure about microaggressions, like it's worth visiting what microaggressions are and whether you're being impacted and how you're being impacted, because they are very real and alive in every workplace. And if you're
Yes.
out there thinking, maybe I have seen microaggressions at work and I've seen the impact on women, on gender diverse people, on um uh yeah, sort of racially marginalized people, and you want to do something about it. Like there are a gazillion consultants in this country. I won't sell my services to you. There are so many people out there, and I would highly recommend that you reflect. If you're hiring a white person to do anti-racism training with no one else in the room with lived experience as a trainer or as a consultant, I think it's really, really important to reflect on why you're doing that. And if you're a white person doing this work, I think it's really important to reflect on why you don't have someone with lived experience standing alongside you along the way, the whole way, equally sharing the process, because you cannot, that's like a man doing gender equity work. That's like a man going in and talking about women's experiences in a way, like we would just think that's atrocious. You know, we thought when Tony Abbott was made Minister for Women's Affairs, the whole country was like, what on earth? You know, but the Minister for Immigration in this country is always a white male.
Yeah.
We've never had a Minister for Immigration that represents what migrants and refugees look like now. And no one bats an eyelid. That's like normal. That's okay. White people can represent us. Well, they don't.
Yeah.
Very passionate about these things. And then we might reduce imposter syndrome if we stop
Yeah. And
making people feel.
it's a valid argument, you know, because I don't know that, I mean, there is mention of it, you know, in some of the readings I've done around this topic, there are mentions about environmental culture and the impact on imposter syndrome. But I still think in a lot of ways, those perspectives are coming back to what you referred to before, where the problem is that person, you know, rather than sort of taking a more macro view and saying, this is something that might be a little bit more systemic. But it's
Yeah.
also interesting to hear you say that it was your own internal processes and changes that allowed you to then shift your mindset to stop labeling yourself or persecuting yourself, essentially, right? With all of this narrative that was just keeping you in those boxes even more.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a perspective within the world of working around trauma-informed practice, because these are coping mechanisms. Imposter syndrome is a coping mechanism learned in life from being told somehow that you're not good enough. And you could be white and male and have that if you were hammered, you know, in your home environment about not being good enough. There's a way of looking at it from a, you know, trauma-informed lens, which is moving away from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. What have you been through? What have you been exposed to as a person that has manifested in you as an adult feeling not good enough in the spaces you're in? And that is a response you learned as a kid. And so we can develop new ways of being in the world by understanding that that's what it was, that was imposed upon me at some point, and I've developed a coping mechanism around surviving in a space as opposed to owning a space. And just observing, because as I shift into, I'm not going to just survive here, I'm going to own it, there'll be different responses. You know, then that's when you see who's really backing you and who actually was invested in keeping you down. But the what happens inside ourselves as we start to see ourselves is those people who want to bring us down stop having power over us, because it's like, oh, that's really sad that you're so invested in me failing just so you can feel good. Like
But also that empowerment of self means that you take on a new attitude, for want of a better word, that this, you know, like you're in charge of who you are. You say who you are and nobody else. You won't allow other people to project their stuff onto you anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And in any
Can I
environment.
just
Oh, Go ahead.
Sorry, go on. No, go on. What are you saying?
Well, I was going to say, like in any environment, where whether it's your home, in your family, at work, whatever it is, when that shift happens for you and you get to a place where you are like no more, that invariably causes the status quo to change, and you have now disrupted the status quo, and there's a fallout from that. And for me, I often use this phrase of it's par for the course, that fallout is going to happen when you disrupt the status quo. And if you already know that that's the game, you just roll with the punches, like you just go with it. But you don't regress just to make somebody else feel better or to maintain, whatever they're doing against you,
100%. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's called a backlash, and we see it. We saw it with hashtag Me Too coming out, hashtag Black Lives Matter. The response to those, like not all men and all lives matter, and that's a backlash response. So when those who are oppressed rise up against oppression, the oppressor will actually double the violence against them, double the oppression, and that's called a backlash. And that can happen in a relationship just with another person who's invested in keeping you down. If you go, no, I'm coming out, they'll double on you. So it's important to know that too, if you're going to come out of something like that, that you do have supports and that you have a mechanism to address the fact that that person might actually violate you more because you're trying to grow in your strength. That's confronting for them, for whatever insecurities are in themselves, and they won't. That may most likely is not conscious behavior. That's their own coping mechanism. That's something they've learned, but that's not your responsibility. So it's how do we demonstrate to each other growth and progression and bring everybody along, so those who sort of, I feel like people who try to stop progress have had really negative messaging growing up. Don't believe, like, I think there's so much shame and trauma in that, and it's like, no, we can all move forward. Like, it's okay. You can be better and I can be better. We can all be better. But I mean, we're also not each other's therapists. They probably need therapy, but that's what I see anyway. And there's some stuff that if we create a society that supports growth and progress, it'll eventually become the norm and more okay to do so. And it's sort of like a ripple effect energetically that will impact people.
Yeah, and the more people are talking about various topics out there, the more, it's coming into people's awareness about what's right and what's not right in terms of how we influence and impact each other, because we definitely, I was talking today with a friend of mine, and he was talking about just, background anxiety. And, I know it's not a common conversation and people don't typically think about this, but the guy in the car next door to you at a traffic light who's feeling anxious is actually impacting you at a subconscious level. You're picking up those things because we are all connected. And because it's an uncommon conversation, we often don't think about that. But the place for change, and I think you've intimated that, like even in your conversation, is in here first, and you have to build that relationship with yourself, is how I would describe it, and get to those places where you are, I'm not going to do this to myself anymore.
Yeah, look, it's very liberating. It's, I mean, the world doesn't become a perfect place and life doesn't become perfect, and it doesn't mean that we don't face more challenges and other things. And I don't think there's no way the imposter syndrome, I'm a perfectionist, and I live with that. It's like an AA meeting. I'm a perfectionist, and I have to monitor that. I have to learn. I keep learning about my perfectionism. Perfectionism is an outcome of trauma, of being told you're not good enough, of shaming, particularly when you're younger, also high standards. Like, there's so many reasons why we could be perfectionists, but I know I am, and it's something that is important to know about ourselves, because we do set unrealistic standards, and we, not just for ourselves, but we can actually set unrealistic standards for others and judge others quite harshly when they don't meet them, because that's how we treat ourselves. So as a business leader, I'm very conscious of that, and I actually very openly talk with my team about it. And I have a team of perfectionists. It's hilarious. Not everyone, but we're also clinicians and we work around trauma and shame. So we talk about we probably have conversations that most workplaces wouldn't have. But in whatever way you can reflect and whatever's, sort of okay in your own world.
Yeah.
It is important that the more awareness we have, but awareness without judgment. Like, it's
Yeah.
funny to say, because perfectionism can lead to a lot of self-judgment, but I've learned to notice it and not judge it, to notice it and go, that's cute. Like, there's little Hala, trying to be like perfect. Because I recognize where in childhood it comes from. And it's like, it's okay. Like, you can make mistakes. It's all right.
Mm.
You don't need to get this 100% right. And I want to thank Donald Trump. I just want to thank Donald Trump because he's helped me so much by setting the bar so low that when I feel perfectionistic about myself, I go, is it as bad as Donald Trump? I'm all right. Like, I haven't sunk that low. And I can think of a few other leaders that I can thank as well. I just don't want to get political, but any more political than I've gotten. So yeah, I just want to thank all the people whose bar is so low because it helps my perfectionism. I can go, you know what? I'm doing all right. Like, I'm not perfect. I've got to, because that answers that part of my brain. But I'm actually haven't stooped to the level where I will destroy all things just to make billions of dollars. So yeah, where do I want to go today?
Well, on that note, for people that are listening and are, grappling with their own level of imposter syndrome and however that kind of shows up for them, what kind of advice would you recommend to them in terms of, in the context of the journey that you've taken, what you've seen work, for them to start to bridge that gap and to get to that place where they overcome it, they minimize it, for themselves? What would you recommend?
First, what we started this conversation with, which is nurture. Like, offer yourself nurture, be nurturing towards yourself and compassionate. Imposter syndrome is a form of self-loathing in a way. It's not, well, it's not being gentle with yourself at all. It's very judgmental of yourself. And so when you notice those feelings arise, like, where can you give yourself nurture and say, you've done really well in this. And that would be the other element of it, is instead of going down the path of what you're not good enough at, actually acknowledge all the things you've done. Generally speaking, people with imposter syndrome are high achievers. So look at, anything and truly recognize, and not major achievements. Don't look at your awards. Look at someone you made smile the other day. Like, look at all the things that are really good about you, and just spend some time congratulating yourself and loving yourself for being able to do those things, because they're not small. Like, that's all that's asked of us, is to be safe and respectful in this world. That's it. You don't need bachelor degrees and PhDs, and you don't need to lead anything, and you don't need to make billions of dollars. You actually just need to not destroy as much as possible while you're alive. And if you've done that, congratulate yourself on it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Hala. And I think we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for your time and your insights. It's definitely been insightful. If anyone who's listening wants to get in touch with you, how can they do that? What's the best way?
We have a website, and you find out more about our services on the website. So it's www.ionv.com.au. So that's Institute of Nonviolence. And you could reach us if you need by email at the info@ionv.com.au, and with any inquiries, any questions. So we do business coaching and mentoring. We offer clinical supervision for family violence practitioners. We offer therapeutic services for people experiencing or using violence. And we deliver tailored training around family violence, gender equity, and anti-racism.
All right, lovely. And you're based in Sydney right now?
I am, but we work across Australia. Yeah,
All
so
right.
we've got people in Melbourne, Queensland, Adelaide, and we've got clients everywhere. So we work across the country.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being here today, and enjoy the rest of your day, won't you?
Yeah, you too, Jenny. It was great talking to you. Thanks for like starting my day, with this invigorating conversation. And thanks for
Likewise.
sharing your experiences as well.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. I'll see you next time.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed the episode. Leave me a comment and let me know what was your biggest takeaway. And if while you were listening, somebody popped into your mind and you know that they would benefit from listening to this, be sure to send the link to them. This series is just getting started, so go ahead and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you'll know when our next episode drops. If you liked what you heard and you want to know more, be sure to check out the show notes. And over the next coming weeks, I'll have some giveaways for you too. In the meantime, I want to thank you for listening, and I'll catch you on the next one.